All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Mr. Chandler. Kick off this little period of instruction with a logo quiz. Let's see how many of you guys can recognize. All right, so we got Tesla, T-Mobile, Toyota, TaylorMade, Tennessee Titans, Texas Tech, Tennessee Volunteers, Portland Timbers. This one was new for me. That's a Major League Soccer team. Texaco, got the Texas Rangers, and then my favorite, of course, Mr. T, childhood hero of mine. So, if you don't know about A-Team or Clubber Lang, you should check out Mr. T. But what is the most valuable tea of all time? It is this little plant right here. It's Camellia sinensis, commonly known as the tea plant. This little plant was so valuable that it was stolen in the world's first fully documented case of corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. So tea is the little plant that led to big change. So a few facts about tea. 3 billion cups of tea are consumed worldwide. You can see here that India and China are the two main producers of tea. We'll get to that in just a minute. 82% of all tea drank is black. Not as much caffeine in tea as soda or Red Bull there, or coffee even. There's a lot of health benefits associated with tea, like reduce heart disease and lots of antioxidants found in tea. Tea has become to be known as the king of all beverages due to its popularity. It is the second most consumed beverage on earth, the first obviously being water. So how did tea become so popular? The global impact of tea. Tea has grown in significance since its rise in popularity in the late 18th, 19th century. China maintained its monopoly on tea throughout much of this time. This is actually a picture of a Japanese tea ceremony, but I just liked the way it was colorized so much that I wanted to use it. Just thought it was a cool picture. So like I was saying, China maintained a monopoly on tea. China itself remained fiercely independent and shut off from the majority of the world. China was the only place that grew, picked, processed, cooked, manufactured tea. It's called the liquid jade of its time. So tea growing and production methods remained closely coveted until Europe came knocking. So as these trade vessels started showing up, China faced the danger of cultural change. So China was just fine being isolated, but they realized that this was an inevitability. So they wanted to control their part in the trade. Didn't go so well sometimes. All right, so it's really difficult to explain how tea became so significant without talking a little bit about opium first, because they shared a lot of parallels and they spent a lot of time in the same cargo holds. So we'll talk a little bit about opium. So when China first opened for trade, the British brought Indian-grown opium to China, and what they were looking for was Chinese tea. It was getting ever more popular in England, so the popularity became the cost started to go up. So British trade with China at this time was only regulated to what they called the Canton system. That was between 1757 and 1842, and all trade was confined to this one city named Guangzhou, and foreigners were not allowed to enter China from this port city. So they could go into the city, but they were not allowed to leave the city to go further into China. So see here, this is a warehouse in India that stored all of the opium that they were growing there. And opium is, of course, highly addictive. Continues to be brought into China by British traders for over 200 years. Millions of people throughout China became dependent upon opium. So in 1729, long before all this started, the exalted emperor banned the sale of opium to China, but it continued to be smuggled into the country because of the high demand. So between 1822 and 1837 alone, the amount of opium in China brought into China grew fivefold. So opium use in China became such a problem that in 1839, all the opium coming to the port of Canton was seized and destroyed with lime and salt water £3 million were destroyed and thrown into the ocean. It's estimated that it was worth $6 million then, which is somewhere around $145 million today. So, Chinese officials were not exactly happy about the situation. You can see here the emperor in 1810 said, "Opium has harm. Opium is a poison. It undermines our good customs and our morality." And then also, this is a quote from Lin Zhezhu, who's the Special Imperial Commissioner of China, 1839. This quote is directed at Queen Victoria. It says, "You do not wish opium to harm your own country, but you chose to bring that harm to other countries such as China." So he was kind of pointing out the fact that it was a bit hypocritical that it was okay to bring opium from India into China, but that same opium could not allow to be brought into the shores of England. So couldn't enter the British ports, but they could take it to China. So that pouring of opium into the ocean led to the First Opium War that lasted from 1839 to 1842. Ends in a somewhat humiliating defeat for the Chinese because the British just had so far advanced a navy that it was not even a fair fight, truly. The English Navy was using steam power by this time, and they were, basically working circles around the Chinese ships that are still powered by sails. So, on August 29th, 1842, was the Treaty of Nanking. This brought an official end to the First Opium War. To add insult to injury, Britain, as part of this treaty, was allowed to trade 5 more cities, not just the Canton system within China. And China also ceded Hong Kong over to the British Crown. And then on top of that, they were also required to pay 21 million silver dollars for war reparations. And that's equivalent to a little over $500 million today. So now that we've talked about opium, let's get back to corporate espionage. In the wake of the First Opium War, officials in England began to worry that the Chinese emperor might legalize opium. And this sounds like a bad thing, but of course, only legalizing it would allow the power that the English ships had to bring it in to be a moot point, really. So this would have been catastrophic to the English tea markets, as this would have left a huge gap in the economic trade triangle. So in order to make money, you have to basically haul a ship that's not empty at any point. So they were taking their ships from England to India, filling them with opium, and taking the opium into China, where they were trading for tea. So that was brought back to England. So at no point does an empty ship make money. So Americans tend to only associate tea with a handful of images. The Boston Tea Party is obviously the first one that pops into most people's mind. Tetley and Lipton obviously been around a lot longer than I even realized. But tea has played a much larger role in international politics, historical trade policies, and global economics. So tea played a significant role in the Industrial Revolution. That begins in the 1700s. It's not because of tea, but tea definitely played a huge role in it. By the 1800s, England had become a powerhouse of industrial production, and we'll talk about why in just a second. So as tea grows in popularity, it becomes a staple in British society. Green tea was first introduced to English in the 1650s. But by the 18th century, only the extremely wealthy and social elite could afford tea. So tea was considered so valuable that people had locked boxes in their homes where they could keep their tea. People that worked inside these homes were often fired if they were caught taking used tea leaves and drying them out and trying to resell them. So apparently they took their tea very seriously. So, all right, tea became so steeped in British culture that time throughout the day is kind of set aside directly for tea. So, and some of these are pretty funny to me. Elevenses, cream tea, afternoon, or commonly known as low tea, and then they have high tea and royal tea. So, once again, take the tea very seriously. So, at the conclusion of the First Opium War, by the 1840s, British officials started to decide that tea was much too valuable for China to continue to monopolize, so something had to be done. It was a very valuable commodity in Britain, and those that stood to profit from the tea trade wanted to protect this asset. The problems after the first Opium War meant many wealthy people were nervous now about their investments in the Chinese tea trade. So a plan was hatched to liberate China from the burden of producing enough tea to meet England's growing obsessions. So, enter Robert Fortune. Robert Fortune was all of these things. He was a plant hunter, a gardener, a thief, and a spy. And a plant hunter is someone that would travel to exotic locations and basically try to bring back live plants. This was becoming somewhat of a hobby for social elite and wealthy people in England. The further away the plant came from, the more exotic, the better. This actually became a very lucrative business as these trade routes continue to expand around the world. So, and China remained deeply suspicious and unwelcoming of strangers, but that made it seem all the more mysterious and like rife for exploration. So Robert Fortune first visited China after the first Opium War, whenever things started to open up. He completed a 3-year botanical expedition through China from 1842 to 1847. When it became time to extract the secrets of tea from China, Fortune was pretty much the ideal candidate to do that for the East India Trade Company. So he was able to live inside the borders of China for years at a time. He used to have a picture here of him in his disguise. He was easily a foot taller on average than just about any other Chinese person, and he had to sew a braid into the back of his hair and basically shave the front of his head off as a symbol of fealty to the emperor. So I wouldn't say he looks very disguised there, but it worked, I guess. So he needed a few things to fall into place to begin growing tea successfully outside of China. First of all, they realized that the mountains, the Himalayan mountains in India, were ideal as far as soil conditions, the amount of rain that it received, the amount of sunshine it received, the amount of time of year. So the plan was to start this operation in India, growing the tea that they were going to extract from China. So he needed the plants, he needed the seeds, he needed the knowledge of the people that had been growing it in China for generations, and he needed tea farmers, most importantly. And the tea farmer part really introduced a new problem because no one was allowed to leave China. That was illegal. So here's a map of where the tea grows in India. As I said, the climate-wise, it's very, representative of China. A lot of similarities there. So stealing plants and shipping them to India is not as easy as it sounds. Often the plants would die due to exposure to salt air and heat on these long voyages. So they had to build these special cases called Wardian cases. It's basically airtight. All the moisture is trapped in there, and this allows these plants to successfully be transplanted from the mountains of China to make it the Himalayan mountains and live. So there's a couple of pictures of Indian tea plantations now. I think it's pretty successful. So I'll talk a little bit about the effect this had on industry. So as tea became cheaper, it was mass produced, it became cheaper, and it became more widely available in England. So workers began to drink tea instead of beer, and this allowed people to perform much better in the workplace. So another thing that happened is if you drink your tea with milk and sugar, you were able to receive more calories and without having to get drunk. So prior to the popularization of tea, the wheat in Britain, which if you've ever looked at the map of Britain, there's only so much land there. Half of the wheat was being used to meet demands for beer. So by replacing beer with tea, they were basically able to use that wheat to make more food, and more food equates to more available workers. So a couple more things. Tea wasn't expensive. Or actually, when tea was expensive, most people drank beer and ale. I talked about it a little bit. It was made for less than ideal workforce. Pregnant women also drink beer, but when they switched to tea, there was a significant drop in the infant mortality rate. By the late 1700s, early 1800s, this was pretty obvious. And the biggest thing that happened when people started to drink tea instead of beer was that it killed a significant portion of the microorganisms that spread contagion. So drinking tea actually reduces cases of cholera, tuberculosis, and dysentery. So by the time that Robert Fortune grew old, the monopoly that China had held on tea was long since destroyed. Tea grown in India far outsold Chinese tea, and many other countries would follow suit and start their own tea plantations. So when quote directly from the book by Sarah Rose, when Robert Fortune stole tea from China, it was the greatest theft of protected trade secrets the world has ever known. So that's my video. Thank you very much.